All right, hello. This is the Nintendo Bros podcast, and today we're going to talk about something that might touch people deeply,
Get us hated, actually.
get us some hate, get us some controversy, maybe. I mean, start a discussion. Really, we're not. It's not an up-to-date topic. We are going to be talking about some of our most disappointing Nintendo games throughout history. We've set the ground rules here. Derek and I are both going to have chosen 3 games each that we found disappointing. Not necessarily the worst games, just games that we were maybe looking forward to. And these are games that were developed by Nintendo in-house. So Rareware does not count. These are not games. These are games that were, well, I don't know. Yes, Rare doesn't count, but other second parties do. Whatever. Just listen. We decided Rareware didn't count, maybe because they have quite a few disappointing games, like Star Fox Adventures. But anyways, Derek, why don't you start us off? We'll go one at a time. Why don't you tell me what the first game on your list is?
All right, my first game is gonna be Super Paper Mario for the Wii, and I played it a couple months ago. I picked it up for like $6 at EB used. And I remember seeing you play it as well. But and it was not necessarily a bad game. It's actually pretty fun. But the thing is, I went in with such different expectations than I got out of it. I'm a huge fan of Paper Mario for the 64. I'm a huge fan of Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door for GameCube. And I want Paper Mario to be in Super Smash Bros. I'm a big Paper Mario guy. And then I came to this new game for the Wii, thinking it was gonna have parties, turn-based battling, those quirky characters that join you. It had a lot of the same, but a lot of it was still missing, and I was left wanting more. So it was kind of a big letdown there, where it's kind of like, it's there, but it wasn't the Paper Mario that I had already grown to love. So I was really disappointed in that game.
Did you beat it? Did you complete it?
I got into I think the very last chapter, and my interest just dropped.
Yeah. Did you? Okay. See, I bought it on release day. I remember when it came out on the Wii back in, I think it was 2007, early 2007. It was originally a GameCube game that they made on the Wii, and I found it really disappointing as well. I agree with you; it did not have the RPG mechanics, but I don't know how much you looked into it. I mean, it sounds like you bought it years later and still didn't know what to expect. I knew what to expect because I read the previews, I read the reviews, I looked into this game. I knew it wasn't an RPG.
Oh, yeah, so did I. I mean, I saw you play the whole game. I knew what I was going into it. So, I mean, it still let me down because I thought, even though I knew what it was going to be, I still thought I could get that kind of same nostalgic feeling or that same kind of sense of what Paper Mario already was, and it just felt different. It wasn't the same.
Okay, and there was points of that game because the basic gameplay to me, the basic thing they were going for in that game, what looked to me like it was almost like a platformer / puzzler, which mixed 2D and 3D dimensions. And there's a couple times where you convert from 2D to 3D, and I just was enamored. I thought the gameplay was really interesting. What I didn't appreciate was the huge amounts of text, and it just didn't feel like it had enough gameplay. I mean, there was moments in the middle of the game that I felt I looked at this game and said, this is great. There's one level, I think it was in a tree, I don't know if you remember this, where you had to go up to the top of a tree by switching dimensions and push. And during that segment, I was like, this is great. This is some great gameplay. But then, it just gets bogged down by the story. And, not that I have anything against storyline in a Paper Mario game, but if I'm playing an RPG, I want a story. But if I'm playing a puzzler platformer, I want a lot of puzzler platformer gameplay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree. Totally disappointing. It actually made me way less interested in Sticker Star, and I actually didn't even play Sticker Star. And from what I heard about it, I'm not gonna play it.
I heard it was terrible.
So at this point, I mean, in the Paper Mario series, they either need to bring back Thousand Year Door as an HD remake or a 3DS remake, or they need to bring back the RPG goodness.
I'm hoping they bring back the RPG goodness. And again, I'm gonna retouch on what you just said. That game was not a bad game. I mean, it was a very fun game. If they put a different name, let's say, on the game, it was a totally different main character, I probably would have really, really enjoyed that game. And it's not that I didn't enjoy the game when I did play it. It's just, it wasn't Paper Mario at the end of the day.
I agree. I mean, there's something empty about it that, when I don't beat a Nintendo game, first-party Nintendo game, then there's something wrong with that game.
Agreed. Yeah.
Really. Okay, let's move on to the next one. I'll take one of mine. This is a obvious disappointing for a lot of people game. Metroid Other M.
Yeah, that's a. Most people don't like that game. Some
It's
people love it, but most hate it.
I don't know anyone that loves it. I know people who like it. And and this is a case where Team Ninja was the developer, so it's not necessarily a first party Nintendo game, but Yakamoto. Is it Yakamoto or Sakamoto?
I have no idea.
Oh man,
Yeah, you just Google that name there, Peter.
sorry, it's Yoshio Sakamoto. And he's the father of Metroid. He has also, worked heavily on the WarioWare series. He was heading this game up, and I remember when they showed this game off, it looked awesome. It had all the action of Ninja Gaiden. It had the, cutscenes. It looked like a third-person Metroid with a lot of action. It looked really cool. And even when the game came out, there was some decent gameplay. Some of the gameplay was interesting, and the fighting was good for the 12 hours that the game lasted. But it was way too easy, and the level designs weren't very strong. And man, that story was horrible. And the game almost feels like it was just very badly designed. Have you played it?
No, I bought that game for $5. I haven't even touched it just because I know everyone says it's horrible. I mean, I might go get around to it, but no, I haven't even played it for a second.
Well, I will say this. I recommend playing it. Just because the actual gameplay, it's very easy to pick up and play, and it's very linear. Like, you're not going to really get lost. Okay. So it's very easy to just pick up and kind of run through and shoot and have a decent time playing it. It's mindless. And some of the perspective changes, and there's some good ideas in it. And I do appreciate the fact that they tried to let the whole game be played with the Wii remote. It is neat to, run with the D-pad and then aim at the screen and have a 3D, looking around in a 3D space, aiming and shooting. Like, it's neat.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I got to give credit for is, they took a Metroid series, or Metroid as the series, that had already had really two dominant ways to play. You had usually the handhelds, or the old ones, the 2D style adventure game,
yep.
or you had the Retro
Metroid
Studios
Prime.
making the Metroid Prime first person, which was a huge success. I mean, I don't know about sales, but
critically.
Critically, I didn't think they sold very well.
The first one sold okay.
Yeah, but for them to say, "Hey, let's throw another spin on Metroid," I gotta say that's pretty ballsy. And I mean, I give them credit for that, but it just didn't pan out. I think the way they hoped it would.
No, and I mean, there's some elements of this game that are absolutely just badly designed, and one of them is there's points in the game, like during cutscenes, where it makes you kind of like find something in the game. Like it'll force you into first person view, and it'll say like, let's look for clues. And you have to aim around the screen, and there was points in this game where you're aiming around and saying, what am I aiming for? And you can't continue without finding it. And at one point, there's like this little blotch of green blood somewhere that you have to literally, with pixel point accuracy, aim at and press a button to trigger the next cutscene. It's contrived, it's boring, doesn't fit within the gameplay style at all, and it's just some of the worst gameplay design I've seen in a Nintendo published game ever.
So just refresh my memory, that's the most recent Metroid released.
Yes.
So okay, so I find it so interesting that since that game came out and it was crap basically.
Well, no, I mean
it wasn't crap, but I'm just saying. Okay, let me rephrase. It wasn't it didn't do as well as Nintendo I think expected.
No, and there's a huge backlash of fans.
Exactly. So I find it so interesting that now Metroid is kind of, at least currently, I know there's a lot of rumors about Metroid coming out soon, but Metroid's right now dead in the water. There's been no talk about it. So I find that really interesting that, that game, at least for the moment, has killed the franchise. I know, I think E3 is going to talk about Metroid, but it's just something interesting.
It certainly has kind of dampened the franchise. I mean, Miyamoto has said things about it. Reggie has said things about it. People are talking about Metroid. And even Miyamoto, I think there's a quote where he says, there's two approaches to Metroid, one being the first person, one being the classic. He doesn't mention this Other M offshoot as it's a third way. This is a forgettable way. It's a forgettable experiment.
To me, it's kind of like, even though I know it's not, it kind of reminds you of like Zelda crossbow training. Link's crossbow training.
I mean,
It's like one of those knockoff games that it's like it's part of the series, but it's not part of the series.
yeah, and I mean, I'd still tell you to go and play it because there's parts of it that are fun. It's not a terrible game.
What would you give it out of 10?
I'd give it a 7 out of 10.
Okay, that's not terrible.
As a Metroid game, I'd say it's. I mean, I haven't played Metroid 2, but I've played every other Metroid, and I'd say it's easily the worst in the whole series.
Okay, you played Metroid Zero Mission?
I haven't. I played Metroid 1, the
Okay,
original.
yeah.
I'm still eagerly waiting for that on Virtual Console. And there's one last tidbit before we move on from another M, which I found really upsetting. Was that I don't have the quote on me or anything, but I remember an interview. I don't remember with one of the designers of the game, maybe even Sakamoto. They basically wrote off Metroid Prime. They said, "How does Metroid Prime tie into this lineage?" Because I don't know if you know this, but Other M follows the traditional Metroid storyline, where there's Metroid One, then Super Metroid follows that, and then Metroid Fusion follows Super Metroid. And then this is kind of like a sequel to to Metroid Fusion, Other M. So there is like this lineage. It's almost like Metroid 4 in a way.
Okay.
But they totally write Metroid Prime off as a side spin-off, whatever American Westernized series. Like it didn't exist in the lineage. Where, my opinion, Metroid Prime is my favorite game of all time. I don't know if you knew that.
Yeah.
I find the trilogy to be the best trilogy of all time. Not just in gaming, but in all media. And I'd go as far as saying Metroid Prime Trilogy on one disc is the best content ever produced on a single DVD. I will go that far. So you can see how I was a bit disappointed that they choose not to acknowledge the Prime series but anyways, let's move on. What's the next game on your list?
Okay, so my next game is a handheld game. I don't know if you've even played it. It came out for the DS, and it's the third installment of a Camelot series. It's called Golden Sun. I don't know if you played them. I played 1 and 2, and those are actually my favorite games of all time. Those two games together make up my favorite two games of all time. I love them. I literally beat the second one. They're RPGs, and I got 99 hours on the time. Got 99 levels on all the characters. It was my favorite game, and so I was so stoked for the third one coming out for the DS. And it came out, and I absolutely hated it. I beat it, and I put it away, and I never touched it again because it just wasn't. I don't know if my nostalgia was just too high, but the game was totally different. The graphics, I liked the sprite graphics from 1 and 2, and they now made it like a 3D.
Bad polygons, right?
Yeah, cheap 3D rendered graphics. The story was crap. It didn't make any sense to the original first two. It kind of just like it jumped 30 years in the future. And then it just said, hey, here's the new problem of going on the world. It didn't really take into account what happened in the first two. And then, all the characters were just unforgettable, which is a huge part of the first two. The characters, the first game you play a party of 4, and then the second game you play the enemies of the first game. You play the enemies, and then
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and you find out how the stories are actually, they're both both parties are actually ended up having a common interest. And then the third game, it was okay, but the enemies were kind of boring. The whole plot line was kind of boring, and the characters were just not that interesting. And I don't think that game, it was the worst critically. The first two are loved, and that game's totally forgotten by everyone.
So the third one, what about the battle system? Was it changed? Was it the same? I mean,
it was almost identical for the most part. I mean, I think that's the thing they kept tried and true, and it was cool. I love the battle system, but again, the sprites is what made it cool. These really cool action scenes and these cool fight animations were really cool in the first two, and then it went to these 3D polygons and it kind of got lackluster. And even though I love the RPGs and JRPGs, for example, this game just, the fighting isn't the main point that I love these games. It was honestly the story and the exploring. The world is huge, and the exploring in that game is just great. So the fighting is good, but that's not the reason I love the game. And another thing that I absolutely hate in any game, so if any producer ever hears this podcast, listen up. I hate games, especially JRPGs or RPGs, that have a point of no return, where if you go to a certain point, you can never go back and get something. So there's items in this third game that I missed, and I checked online. It says, oh, you can never go back ever. I literally had to restart the game because I'm a completionist for this like one specific thing.
Oh yeah,
So I was like, man, I just blew 20 hours because of this stupid mechanic in the game.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of games do that though. I remember Metroid Prime, you had to scan certain enemies. You only had one chance to scan them.
Yeah, but to me, scanning I mean, that's like 100% to the next level. This
You're
was
right.
like
It's
this was
different.
like one
Yeah.
of the key things. It's like a key fighting thing in the game, and there's like 60 in the whole game, and they all give you like a new fighting power.
Okay, so I mean, it sounds like you were disappointed, but it wasn't a bad game. You beat it. It had the same
Oh,
battle system, so it's not a bad game inherently. It doesn't sound like.
oh no, I loved the game. It's kind of I mean, it's a 7 out of 10, just like Metroid Other M. But it's coming from the 10 out of 10 or 11 out of 10 series for me. So it's kind of like, oh man, this is not what my expectations were coming in.
Did you buy the Virtual Console Golden Sun on the Wii U?
I didn't, just because I have those games still for Game Boy Advance, and I have several systems that can play them. And I mean, I would if I wanted to spend the extra $2. But the point is that that game is meant for handheld. And
Apparently, though, I mean, I actually haven't bought a single Virtual Console Game Boy Advance game yet, but apparently the sprite work on an HD TV looks great.
really,
Yeah, like apparently it's well worth it to rebuy these games, and it's like playing an HD indie game. It's not like playing a muddled, compressed mess. You are really looking at a beautiful version of it, and I've even heard people say that the Game Boy Advance Virtual Console is the best form of Virtual Console yet.
okay, maybe I definitely will check that out, because I mean that game is awesome.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to my next one. This is one not many people talk about, probably because it was so disappointing. But that's 1080 Avalanche on the GameCube. Now, I don't think you played Avalanche, did you, Derek?
No, I played 1080 for the 64, but never the Avalanche. No.
So let's do a little retrace here. 1080 snowboarding on the N64 was a great game. It predates SSX, and it predates a lot. It was basically, the way I saw it, it was the first snowboarding game I ever sunk my teeth into. The box art even had a mannequin snowboarding, a really weird box art. They got sponsored by Lamar Snowboards, or not sponsored. They licensed it, so it felt like a real snowboarding game. I know they had Cool Boarders on the PlayStation, but that was a janky mess. So 1080 really was the be-all, end-all snowboarding game when it came out, and it was great. Like
What about SSX?
SSX didn't come out till PS2.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, the first SSX launched for the PS2. So there really was, and SSX is a kind of a fantasy snowboarding game, right? There's no realism.
Yeah.
And there is Amped, I believe, on Xbox, but that's a little bit too simmy for me. I mean, I really liked 1080 snowboarding because it actually focused on racing, where snowboarding and skateboarding have become these things that are all about tricks, where 1080 really was about racing and like extreme racing on giant mountains, through cabins, around buses and stuff like that. And it was really tough because you really had to master the way each character moved. The controls felt really good, and it harkens back to Wave Race 64, I would say, because they're both developed by Nintendo EAD. They're both very, control centric. Like you really feel like you're controlling that watercraft or that snowboard, and you really have to aim, control how much you turn and everything. Really, truly, true games that needed the analog stick. And what they did, they had NST, which is a Nintendo Software team, I believe, out of the U.S. Out of the U.S. developed Wave Race Blue Storm for the GameCube. Nintendo Software Technology out of Redmond, Washington, I believe, had them develop Wave Race Blue Storm. Wave Race Blue Storm was a solid follow-up. So they gave them 1080 snowboarding to follow up on the GameCube. And I'm giving way too much detail here. Anyways, 1080 Avalanche was a disappointing game. Graphically, it wasn't impressive for the time. It was not buried among a bunch of other better snowboarding games like SSX3 and Amped. And it had weird kind of stiff controls. The trick system was abysmal. I mean, I'm not saying the original 1080 snowboarding trick system was great, but you had nothing else to compare it to. And with Avalanche, they just didn't really update the tricks. It just wasn't. It didn't make sense the way they handled doing tricks.
Yeah.
And they had this really cool promoted feature to be followed by an avalanche and like outrun an avalanche. And it wasn't really that cool because, you can't see what's behind you when you're racing. So it was kind of just like the avalanche is behind you and a couple, low polygon trees fell down. It was unimpressive to say the least. And, it's a short game. You can beat it really quickly. It's, and where 1080 Snowboarding the original only had, maybe eight levels, I think. For the new one to only have, handful of levels, I think it was maybe 12 or 14 levels. Not very impressive for a racing game.
Yeah.
And the frame rate really took a hit with multiplayer. It did have LAN play, like you could hook two GameCubes together. But I don't think anyone out there ever had two GameCubes with two copies of Avalanche with LAN play set up. You know what I mean? Maybe at a convention center, but
Yeah.
no one regularly had that.
So you did buy 1080 Avalanche, though. You owned that game?
No, I rented it. I'm gonna admit right now, I rented it. I beat the whole thing in a rental. And I said I'm not gonna buy this.
Okay, yeah.
And where with 1080 the original, I rented it and then bought it. So needless to say, 1080 Avalanche, I was looking forward to a follow-up to 1080 Snowboarding, and it's another one of those cases where 1080 Avalanche kind of killed the series, and it'd be almost awkward to go back to it now. It almost feels like a series from decades ago.
Yeah, I can
I mean,
attest to that.
and again, it's not a horrible game. It's not broken. It's okay. It just didn't carry on with the greatness of the original 1080.
And you said it was made by the same company that made Wave Race, right?
Made the sequel to Wave Race. So Nintendo EAD in Japan made the first Wave Race and the first 1080, which are both, groundbreaking and control-centric, fun-to-play games. And then NST and their American Nintendo Software Technology division made the Wave Race Blue Storm and 1080 Avalanche.
And neither of those did well.
Well, Blue Storm did well enough. It didn't break a million sales, but it didn't tank. And
Wave Race also is a franchise that died from that game too.
It more or less did die, and there's no contesting that Blue Storm was not as good as the original Wave Race. But I really enjoyed Blue Storm. It had a lot of cool factors with it. It had a lot of ambition. It had great graphics for the time. Still had great controls. So there's still a lot to say about that game. I still have a fond place for Blue Storm in my heart.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, let's move on. So this is the last game on your list here.
Yeah, so this is my last game. I have a feeling a lot of people that listen are going to hate me for this, probably you as well.
Yep.
So my last game is Zelda Wind Waker. And I picked this game, I hate to say this, but I didn't actually play the GameCube version. I played the HD Wii U remake, so I don't know how valued my opinion is here, but I guess I'm trying to think about what it would be like when it came out. And I was just thinking, Ocarina of Time, amazing game. Majora's Mask, totally different, but amazing game. Both those games for the 64. And then I think it was E3, I don't even know the year, but you could probably figure this out, where they showed what the GameCube Zelda was going to be like. And everyone was so hyped for it.
You mean in Space World 2000? Probably. When they showed the realistic Zelda?
Yeah, the realistic Zelda. And then
a
couple months later, they said...
It was 1 year later at Space World 2001.
Okay, yeah. A year later, they said, oh, yeah, and actually it's going to be a cel-shaded Zelda. And I mean,
the backlash was crazy. I remember that.
Yeah, exactly. And, I think... I'm playing the HD version, and it's gorgeous. And the cel-shaded looks amazing, and I'm totally on board that style of art.
Yeah.
But, I can imagine everyone being let down by that. And as far as Zelda games go, Wind Waker, without a doubt, to me, is my least favorite one. I have no problem traveling a long distance. I've done the Skyward Sword flying. I've done the Twilight Princess traveling. But this one, the sailing, it's so blue. Like, there's nothing there. I mean, there's a few little mini games as you sail, but it's just boring. And it's a very easy game. It's very kiddie-ish, which I know is all Zelda's kind of.
But what do you mean? What do you mean by kiddie-ish?
I mean, it just looks so. I mean, it just seems like a little more cartoony, not just.
Well, it is cartoony.
I know, but not just graphically. But I think it's like a little more.
It's easier.
And more animated as far as like the humor goes, and like the bad guys are a little bit silly. Like they're not silly.
Yes,
yeah.
I agree. It's not the stakes aren't as high and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. When you're comparing
the tone.
when you're comparing it to good tone, as opposed to Twilight Princess, which is a GameCube/Wii game, which is way darker and so much the way they should have done Wind Waker, in my opinion. Keep true to the fans of what they wanted, especially not just the fans, but what you already showed people.
No, now going back here because I'm going to speak to the because as someone who played it on launch day and beat it the original, I can speak to the way people felt then. But how did you feel buying it on the Wii U, the HD remaster? Your playtime with it, like speak to that and your personal experience.
So I still haven't beaten the game just because I find it so annoying, one, to change the wind and then sail for 15 minutes to go to one island and have to do it all over again.
How far have you made it?
I think I'm at the second or third temple.
Do you have the have you gone to the spoiler alert? Have you gone to Hyrule
Uh,
underwater?
no.
Okay. Well, I,
But
I
okay.
truthfully, I don't know if you have a valid say here because you really need to beat that game to really say it was disappointing. I feel. Yes, there's parts that you probably don't like about it, but especially, I mean, you also need to consider the fact that you're playing a game that came out in 2003 or in 2002 in Japan. It's an older game.
But it's not about the. That's what I'm trying to say. It has nothing to do with the age of the mechanics or the graphics or the gameplay or whatever you want. It's just the. I'm trying to put myself. You're right. I really shouldn't be doing this if I only played the remake. But
And not even beat it.
no,
You're not even halfway.
agree. But putting my head into someone that wanted the expectations of what Wind Waker was, and it wasn't what it was. And for me, not only knowing that, but for what I think Zelda games are, this game is the most unlike the other Zelda games in the whole franchise.
Okay, I mean, well, let's talk about Zelda for a sec because I think you really need to separate Zeldas between the 2D top-down Zeldas and the 3D Zeldas.
Agreed. So let's just talk about 3Ds.
We're talking about 3D Zeldas where you have Ocarina, Majora's, Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, and Skyward Sword. And I, without a doubt, would disagree with you saying it's different than the rest. Without a doubt, Skyward
Majora's
Sword.
Mask.
No, Skyward Sword to me stands out as the different the odd duck from the other four.
Oh, I disagree.
And the reason for that is the gameplay and the controls. Where Skyward Sword, there's no real hub, there's no real overworld. The dungeons are smaller, and there's lots of puzzles within the worlds. There's less towns. There's less. It's a lot. To me, it's a lot different. I mean, at the end of the day, with the first four 3D Zeldas, you set your item to your sub buttons. You have one button for rolling and attacking. You have a lock on. It's like the controls are almost exactly the same. And I would almost argue that one of Wind Waker's problems was that it wasn't different enough from Ocarina of Time / Majora's. For how revolutionary Ocarina of Time was when it first came out and how many new ideas it had. I mean, hell, it invented Z targeting and locking on. Wind Waker seemed to be kind of the same in a different setting, except easier. And beyond the graphics, like looking beneath the graphical style, it really is the same foundation. It's, do a sub quest, go to a dungeon. Do a sub quest, go to a dungeon. Do a sub quest, go to a dungeon, and until you beat the game.
Yeah, okay. I'll agree to that overarching gameplay idea of dungeon, all that kind of stuff. But the thing is that, to me, if I'm looking at Ocarina, I know that's a Zelda game. If I'm looking at Majora's, I know it's a Zelda game. Twilight Princess, for sure, is a Zelda game. Even Skyward Sword, when I look at that, I know...
Well, are we talking about graphics? Like, what are we talking about specifically?
But not just graphics. I mean, the tone, like you said, or the theme, or the graphics, or just the story.
Well, I mean, I found the story in Wind Waker is a little goofier, but it's not so much goofier than Skyward Sword. It certainly doesn't have the dark tones of Majora's Mask or Twilight Princess. And I mean, I don't want to open this door up. We definitely need to do a discussion on the 3D Zeldas.
Yeah.
Because it's a deep conversation and it looks like we disagree. But I really think you need to go back and beat the Wind Waker before saying anything.
Okay.
And you need to look up online how to get the Swift Sail, because the Swift Sail is one of the updates they made to the Wii U version where you can sail faster. And believe me, as somebody who played the original version without the Swift Sail, and with having to do this crazy Triforce hunt at the end, which you won't have to do as much. You have to find 12 pieces, buy maps, get them deciphered for money. It's a crazy padding to the game. I beat the whole game, and even though I will agree with you, to me it's the worst of the 3D Zeldas, only a little bit below Skyward Sword. It still has those moments, and I will tell you, one of the best moments in the game you haven't even experienced. The ending's really fantastic. The very end boss is just amazing. It's like an epic scene of the times. And one of the things that I think happened with the Wind Waker and why a lot of gamers were disappointed, especially when it first came out, was that we were maturing from the N64. We had more polygons to work with. Their games were getting more complex, and we were kind of entering this phase of PS2 and Grand Theft Auto, and GameCube came out and it was purple, and it just really didn't help this kiddie image that Nintendo was trying to shed. And we only really got mature games with the PlayStation. Like before that, it was a lot of fantasy, a lot of RPGs, a lot of platformers. But only when the PlayStation came out did we really have like a surge of mature rated games. And only on the Xbox and the PS2 did we get even more of a surge of mature rated games, more sports, more violence, more first person shooters, Halo and GTA and Devil May Cry and everything like that. And where a lot of games were evolving into this, more realistic, I should say, realistic graphical style. What people expected was Zelda to follow that trend of a realistic graphical style, the same graphical style that other franchises had followed, such as Final Fantasy.
Yeah.
And they went back on that and basically said, no, here's like Chibi Link, anime style animated Link, and people were really disappointed. I was really disappointed. I kind of looked at it and said, this is not this mature Zelda, and more so, I said this is not going to help the GameCube. And if the GameCube doesn't get helped by a big Zelda game, which is their premier game, then this is going to hurt third-party sales and lead to less third parties. And it certainly did. And I think it's one of the biggest mistakes they maybe made was to make Zelda in this style for the sake of the GameCube. But looking back, if we're talking about graphical style and tone, I think it's the best looking of all the Zeldas. I mean, I love the remakes on 3DS. I think they did a beautiful job. But I think that Wind Waker, the fact that they can re-release it now and still be seen as a beautiful game, it stood the test of time. And I think that Wind Waker has stood the test of time graphically more than Twilight Princess and more than Skyward Sword.
Oh, okay. I'll agree to that. I mean, like I said, it's a gorgeous looking game.
Yeah, and
and
only when Twilight Princess came out, and Twilight Princess was great, but only when that game came out and I beat that did I look back and say, Wind Waker was a beautiful, unique experience. And I feel like where you said it's not what you expected, where Twilight Princess came out, the expectations, people had expectations, and Nintendo met every single one of them, and it was disappointing because they did. Where I'm used to Zelda's breaking my expectations and saying, no, this is brand new. This is something brand new, and I'm really excited for the new one. But Wind Waker kind of came out and did say, we're going to challenge your expectations with graphics and with style and with tone, and they certainly did. And in my opinion, has some of the best presentation of any game Nintendo made on the GameCube. Now, with that said, gameplay-wise, yes, I don't want to hamper your experience completing this game because you really, really need to complete it. But it was way too easy. It was linear, very linear. It only had one major town, and this huge ocean felt like it's beautiful riding around this ocean, but it's a huge missed opportunity. They've even admitted the game they had to scrap 2 dungeons. It's an incomplete game, and even re-released on Wii U, it only reminded me how incomplete it was. So yes, I will agree that I was disappointed in the initial release from a gameplay perspective, and I was disappointed as well with the re-release on Wii U because it only reminded me how much of a missed opportunity this beautiful setting in this beautiful world, this beautiful touching world was. And I'll tell you, I remember distinctly playing Wind Waker when I was, 13 or 14. I got it on release, and this is after Metroid Prime, after I had experienced my favorite game of all time. And about the point that you're at playing Wind Waker, I looked at this game and I said, this is the best game I've ever played. This is the best game ever. Because the dungeons and the graphics and the diversity was so great. And let me tell you, it went downhill from there. You start to see the structure. There are highlights, but you get to the end of the game and you realize, this is one giant empty ocean. And, after 1/3 into the game, you've seen all the major islands. And it never gets challenging, and there's not a lot, the collectibles aren't very rewarding, and you constantly have a maxed out wallet. And there's all these things that it didn't have the gameplay evolution that I expected from the N64 games. So I think on some merits, yes, it's a disappointing game. But on other merits, I think I don't know if you have the right to say that because you've only played half of a remake 10 years later.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I'll concede to that point. I can't really argue that.
I mean, in general, on GameCube, I think where it's funny where the F Zeros and the Metroids and the Paper Mario's thrived on GameCube, and even Pikmin and Smash Bros. Some of the highlights of those franchises, the Mario and the Zelda were some of the weaker entries. The Wind Waker and Super Mario Sunshine is what I'm referring to. Were some of the weaker entries in those series, and
Yeah.
I think it definitely hurt the GameCube overall. But we'll see. I mean, we'll see what happens with those franchises. Do you have any last comments about that?
Nope. I'm gonna go play that game though.
Okay, and play the game, and then we'll have our discussion about because that's the last 3D Zelda you need to play.
Yeah.
And if you play that, we can do our podcast on the 5 3D Zeldas and our chat about them. I'd love to talk about those and compare them and rank them because I love it's an interesting series that has had ups and downs, and it's been held back and moved forward and all sorts of things.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go back to the topic.
Okay, back to the topic of most disappointing games. We've gotten our 5. So I've labeled out Metroid Other M and Trinity Avalanche. You've labeled out the Wind Waker, albeit unfairly. You said Golden Sun 3, and what was your other game? Sorry, Paper Mario, Super Paper Mario.
Super Mario. Yeah.
There's certainly other disappointing games. My last game will also be divisive because, and maybe you can guess it by this hint. It's by far the best-selling entry in the series, and people do love this entry of the series. But to me, it is the absolute worst entry in the whole series, and
It's the best selling.
by far. It's one of the best-selling games ever.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Oh, it's sold. You know what? I'm gonna pull up a list here. Top. It's. I'm not gonna pull up a list. Forget it. Too much time. It's one of the best-selling games ever in its own right. I believe it sold about 35 million copies. Not to mention it has a very bland box art, probably the most bland box art in the entire series. And this is coming from a guy who has played every single Mario Kart on launch day. I remember Super Mario Kart on not on launch day because I was a little kid. I remember Super Mario Kart having fond memories of that. I loved it. You better believe 64, I made mom buy it for me on the first day in February 1997. I remember the very first day it came out, I couldn't stop playing it. Introduced the battle mode. It didn't introduce the battle mode, but it made this battle mode something very memorable. And I loved it on GameCube. I really liked Super Circuit on Game Boy Advance. DS was obviously a peak for the series. Not a peak, but one of the peaks.
Oh, I think DS is probably the best one in my opinion. Well, after 8, but yeah.
I mean, 8 to me is just a godsend as far as controls. I mean, it's missing features.
Oh, I mean, besides battle mode though, I mean, as far as racing goes, Mario Kart 8 is without a doubt
Top
the best.
notch.
Yeah.
But I mean, the DS version had that mission mode that was really awesome.
Oh, that's why I love the DS. There was so much to it, and the controls were super tight. The DS one is the best handheld, at least for sure. I didn't like 7 as much.
And it had battle mode that was really good, and it had online battle mode, and it was I believe it was elimination style battle mode where you had 5 balloons and
you can blow up your balloons using your mic
or holding down the select button.
Oh yeah.
But battle mode was really rewarding, and you could jump into that with a friend, and you could play single card play. And I kid you not, I remember in high school I was in grade 11 or something, and we would go to art class. And we had like 6 or 7 people with Nintendo DSs playing Mario Kart DS. It was insane. It was wild. We played in the library at lunch. Like we were the nerds playing. We weren't even nerds. We were really cool. The most popular buff guys in the school. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. So, anyways, back to Wii. I mean, I even really like Double Dash, and Mario Kart 7 on a DS, and obviously 8 were great. They came after, but Wii was a huge disappointment for me. And let's look back at how they announced it. They announced it at E3 2007 at the very end, and let me tell you, it didn't look very impressive. Graphically, it doesn't even look like a big jump from Double Dash.
Yeah.
And obviously the Wii wasn't very capable, but, Brawl looked a whole lot better than Melee, and Mario Galaxy looked a whole lot better than Sunshine, and, Nintendo was rolling hard by the time E3 2007 rolled around that Wii had just come out and exploded, and they basically said, boom, here's Smash Bros coming soon, here's Metroid Prime 3 coming soon, here's here is what else, Galaxy coming soon. They had all these, that was basically it from what I remember. Third parties were there too, Zack and Wiki, but they they were like, "Oh, we have another surprise for you. Here is Mario Kart Wii." And I kind of looked at it and I go, it doesn't look very impressive. Brawl looks great. Galaxy looks great. I have enough to care about right now that it's not like with Wii U where every single release you're just feeding info and feeding the release because there's so few releases. The Wii was doing okay. And then they released it the next following year in 2008. Smash Bros. Came out in March. And then it came out in April in Europe. And then I believe it came out in May in, was it? When did it come out? April?
I think it was May.
Mario Kart Wii. I got to look this one up because I need to know. It came out April 10th in. It came out April 10th in Europe, and it came out the end of April in North America. So I mean, this is the 1-2 punch Nintendo had. They had, Smash Bros in March. They had Mario Kart in April, and then they had Wii Fit in May. And those three games sold disgusting. I think collectively sold over 100 million copies. Those three games, and can you imagine that happening now on Wii U? Can you imagine them releasing Mario Kart and then Smash Bros the next month?
Yeah.
No,
right.
no, they need a whole half year for those games now. They really got to space those out.
Yeah.
Then again, Smash Bros hadn't necessarily become this giant thing, and neither had, well, Mario Kart sort of, but they hadn't become as giant and tentpole releases as they had now. So back to Mario Kart Wii. I remember you bought it on launch day, and I remember playing it with you. And not only were the graphics unimpressive, but I didn't like the tricks very much. I don't mind them now, but the half pipes, like, what's with the half pipes? And I didn't think the Wii controls were great. It's just not impressive. There's nothing impressive about it. The weapon selection was so unbalanced.
Oh man, yeah.
I hated the POW block. I hated the Stormy Cloud. I really hated some of those dumb item inclusions, and it felt like the most randomized one where you can be really skilled at it, but you can still get crushed. And I know there's some people. I didn't like it. It felt off to me, and I really, really didn't like the graphical style.
No, yeah, I totally agree. I mean, Mario Kart Wii is without a doubt my least favorite one too, and the main thing it has to do with me is, again, the unbalance of the items and the rubber banding of computers in that game. To me, I played that game with my roommates back before Mario Kart 8 came out, and they would always beat me, and I would say that means nothing. Like, that game is total no skill, all luck. Even though most of Mario Kart is a little luck with crazy antics, that game is just, there is no skill in that game. It doesn't mean you're a good person at that video game because you're really good at that Mario Kart Wii game.
Yep.
Because it's not a fun, fair game. It's kind of like, blue shell, red shell, and now I'm in 9th place. And it was just real. I hated that game. I hate that game.
I mean, I can acknowledge that it's not a broken game. It's a decent game and people enjoy it, but it's definitely my least favorite in the series, and I just didn't play it very much. Even the battle mode. I mean, you had to be broken off into teams.
Yep.
I mean, it kind of. I don't appreciate that either. So the battle mode was a write-off, just as much as the Mario Kart 8 battle mode was a write-off, and. Yeah, even the the course selection wasn't great.
Yeah, and the controls are not tight. They don't, for a racing game, they just don't feel. It's not that they're not intuitive. It just doesn't feel like you're doing. It just feels weird. I don't know how to explain it. Where Mario Kart 7 and Mario Kart 8 that came after, or even Mario Kart DS, which I think has the best controls. All of them feel like I'm in control of this kart. I'm racing. Where Mario Kart Wii is like, what the frig is going on while I'm doing this?
Yeah, exactly. And back to the items. I'm looking at a list here of items. It's just a bloated item list. You got the mushroom, triple mushroom, golden mushroom, mega mushroom, item block, fake item block, banana, 3 banana, green, 3 greens, red, 3 reds, blue, shell, star, lightning, thundercloud, bomb, blooper, bullet bill, and pow block. Like, it's bloated.
Yeah.
I will give it one nod though. I will give it one serious nod. It has the best character selection in the entire series.
I agree to that too. That's what I was the one highlight I was gonna say. They have, I mean, I'm surprised that Mario Kart 8 doesn't have all the characters that Mario Kart 7 does. And Mario Kart 8 threw in these random baby characters, and I like all the Koopa Bros, but they omitted a lot of main stake Mario Kart characters for those Koopa Bros and those baby characters, which I think is weird.
Yeah, I mean, and there in Mario Kart Wii there was Baby Mario, Peach, Luigi, and Daisy. They didn't have
Yeah.
Baby Rosalina. But I mean, some of the missing they have characters that were sorely missing from the Wii U Mario Kart 8. Dry Bones,
Birdo.
Birdo, Diddy Kong, Bowser Jr., and
Koopa, I don't think is even.
I believe Koopa's in Mario Kart 8. No?
Maybe I'm wrong.
I mean, like you, I only play as Waluigi.
Yeah, I only play Luigi. All the way.
So I have a bit of a different opinion. Yeah, no, Koopa Troopa's in Mario Kart.
Okay, my bad.
8. But, Funky Kong also made an appearance. So you had 3 Donkey Kong appearances in this game.
Yeah, Diddy Kong, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I just found it really disappointing. And even the levels that made comebacks in Mario Kart 7 and 8 are some of my least favorite levels. And I don't really appreciate Grumble Volcano or Maple Tree Way.
Or the Wario Mines one. I hate that
Or
one.
Wario Mines, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an overall disappointing game. All right, so that covers our 6 overall disappointing games. Do you have a 4th one that you'd want to mention in your list?
Yeah, the one I just want to say off, just a quick mention is I don't know which exactly in the series it was, but the Mario Party series, when it took the turn of you, instead of you controlling your individual character, you
9.
all, yeah, I think it was 9, that's what I was
Yeah.
going to say. Man, that just ruined the whole game for me. I liked it when you rolled your character, you're moving on a game board, you're collecting stars, and now it's this kind of crap. It's like, oh, you're just moving on a cart and playing mini games. I thought it ruined a lot of what the game was about.
You know, what they need to do, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, is they need to make Mario Party Anniversary 1, 2, and 3 in HD with online. Just redo those games. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Yeah, I agree.
I mean, stop trying to reinvent the wheel and ruining it, and stop letting ND Cube handle a franchise that's a premier franchise. Like, this series sells really well. Treat it so.
Yeah.
You know, I've been really disappointed in how they've handled Mario Party. To be honest, since 4.
Yeah, I was going to say that too. 4 through 8, I didn't even know existed.
Yeah, I mean, it's like 8 and 9 come around. You're like 5, 6, 7. I almost don't have no memory of 5, 6, 7. I know they had a microphone in there at one point.
Yeah.
But they really started to go downhill on the GameCube, and they have almost an exclusive market on these party games. Please do it some justice.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess that really wraps us up. Listeners, if you have any disappointing Nintendo games that you want to talk about, let us know. Let's keep the lines open. I mean, we're just starting this podcast. We need, we need some activity. You know what I mean? to stay alive here, give us hope. If you're listening, if you've made it to the end, I guess. Hopefully you have. But yeah, so thanks for listening, and check us out soon.
Have a good one.